August 8, 1963, a train carrying $7 million in cash stops dead on an English railway. By dawn, it's gone. But here's what nobody tells you. The real crime wasn't the heist itself. The conventional story goes like this. A mastermind named Bruce Reynolds orchestrated a military precision theft that would become the template for every Ocean's 11 fantasy ever made. Except that's not quite right. Everyone assumes the planning was flawless, the execution seamless, the getaway clean. They're wrong. The real genius and the real failure lay in what came after. So who was Bruce Reynolds, and what made him think he could pull off the impossible? He wasn't born a criminal mastermind. Reynolds was a career petty thief, small jobs, low stakes, nothing that suggested he'd one day engineer the largest robbery in British history at that time. But somewhere along the way, he became obsessed with a single idea, that proper planning could trump everything else. The question isn't whether Reynolds was smart. Court records confirm he was meticulous. The real question is, how did a man with no military background, no engineering expertise, and no inside knowledge of train security systems convince 12 other criminals that this plan would work? The answer reveals something darker about human psychology than any heist movie ever shows. Reynolds had one crucial advantage. He'd spent years studying the traveling post office, the mail train that ran nightly from Glasgow to London. He knew its route, its schedule, its vulnerabilities. He watched it, he timed it, he obsessed over it. But knowing a target and actually breaching it are two entirely different crimes. So how did he bridge that gap? He recruited a man named Gordon Goody, a violent career criminal, and together they assembled a network of specialists. A railway worker on the inside, a former soldier who understood logistics, a safecracker, a getaway driver. On paper, it looked like a proper operation. In reality, it was held together by cash promises and the kind of trust that evaporates the moment something goes wrong. The night of August 8th arrived. The train was halted using a false signal, a detail so simple, so elegant that it almost worked. 15 gang members boarded. They moved with purpose. They knew exactly where the money was. Within minutes, they transferred $7 million into bags and vehicles. But here's where the official narrative breaks down. What happened next? Most accounts claim they scattered to a farmhouse hideout called Leatherslade Farm. Some sources say they split the money immediately. Others claim they waited. But here's what the evidence actually shows. They stayed together longer than any smart criminal would. They got comfortable. They let their guard down. They made mistakes that suggested they believed the hardest part was over. Within days, police traced them to Leatherslade. Within weeks, most gang members were arrested. But here's the puzzle that court documents never fully resolved. Where was the money? Authorities recovered about $5 million. The remaining $5 million simply vanished. Reynolds claimed it was hidden across multiple locations. But was that the truth or a convenient story? Everyone assumes the gang hid the money themselves, split it, buried it, stashed it in safe houses. But consider the alternative. What if they never had it in the first place? Not all of it, anyway. What if someone inside the operation, someone close to Reynolds, skimmed before the split? It's a theory that fits the evidence better than the official story. Reynolds himself fled to Mexico. He lived there for years, supposedly waiting for the heat to die down before retrieving his fortune. But he eventually returned to Britain and served his sentence. Why would a man with $5 million hidden somewhere come back voluntarily? Unless the money wasn't actually hidden. Unless it was already gone. The forensic evidence suggests something else entirely. Police found traces of the stolen currency in unexpected places, on gang members, in their homes, in locations nowhere near Leatherslade. The distribution was chaotic, inconsistent. It suggests the money was never carefully divided. It was grabbed, distributed hastily, and some of it was spent almost immediately. Some historians argue that British authorities themselves may have recovered more than they officially reported. In the 1960s, institutional trust was different. Police weren't subject to the same transparency requirements. Unaccounted cash could theoretically disappear into departmental budgets or personal pockets. It's speculative, but it's not baseless. But the most compelling explanation is simpler and uglier. The money was spent. Gang members used it for legal fees, bribes, living expenses, and the kind of flashy purchases that attract attention. Every criminal knows that suddenly appearing wealthy is a neon sign for investigators. Yet the historical record shows several gang members did exactly that. Reynolds himself, decades later, suggested that the gang's inability to access the money without drawing suspicion meant it effectively ceased to exist as usable wealth. You can't spend $5 million without triggering alerts. You can't move it across borders without documentation. You can't invest it without creating a paper trail. So what's the difference between hidden money and money that doesn't exist? The Great Train Robbery's real masterstroke wasn't the heist itself. It was that Reynolds convinced himself and briefly convinced the world that he was smarter than the system. But the system has more resources, more patience, and more immunity to hubris. Once the money was stolen, the clock started. The longer it sat unused, the more worthless it became. So where did the $5 million go? The evidence points to a truth far less romantic than any heist narrative. It was spent, it was seized, it was lost to the friction of moving money through criminal channels. Reynolds' real legacy wasn't the robbery itself. It was proving that even perfectly planned crime fails when human nature enters the equation. Answer to our original question, where did the fortune go? Is this nowhere and everywhere? Some was recovered, some was spent, some was seized by authorities who may or may not have documented it properly, and some was lost to the simple, brutal fact that stolen money, no matter how carefully hidden, becomes a liability the moment you need to use it. The real crime wasn't the theft. It was the fantasy that crime could ever be truly victimless or ultimately profitable. Subscribe so you don't miss the next investigation into the psychology of crime, where the real story always hides beneath the legend.